I shall ask the applicant or his agent to speak, and then ask members of the public who've asked to speak either for or against the application that's in front of us. This will be followed by any speakers from town or parish council, and finally the ward councillor. Councillors will then have the chance to question the officer, and then this should turn into a general debate. When all the points are discussed, I shall try and see if we've got a resolution and call for a proposer and seconder, and then we shall vote according to our normal rules. Agenda item 7 tonight is to receive and debate a report of the Assistant Director Planning about the revised planning enforcement policy. Members of the public are welcome to sit through this item should they wish. It can be found on the internet by logging into www.tendc.gov.uk. Can the officer confirm that we are going live at this moment? I have a signal that we are. Good. As usual, of course, not only is this meeting going out live, it will be recorded by the council and will be available on the council website. Now, let us turn to item 1 on the agenda. We have apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Fowler and Councillor Placey, neither of whom have been able to provide a deputy. Now, as some of you will know, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Fowler, is not with us today, so I have asked Councillor Alexander to step into the role tonight, as he was the runner-up at the recent election. Does that get a blessing of all the members? And the answer is yes, thank you very much. And now we've got the minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of August. I haven't received notification of any omissions or inaccuracies, so I'm going to ask for approval of these minutes. Do I have a proposer and a seconder? And I do, and everybody else indicates that they're happy that I sign them. Right, now we move to declarations, either pecuniary or personal. Does anybody have any declarations? Councillor.
Although it's been deferred, I was going to declare an interest in item 5. Would you like me to continue to do so? Oh, no, that's fine. That's the one that's you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just referring to the matter which may be discussed later, which is on the blue pages. As I was not taking part, I didn't take part in the original. I'm sort of putting out there that I may not be allowed to sit in this one. I'm getting nods, so I will not be sitting in on that application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify that Councillor Harris, you wouldn't be able to take part in the debate and the vote because, as you say, you didn't take part in the first item, but as a district councillor, you are still permitted to stay within Part B of the proceedings. So you could still stay if you wanted to by that point, or you could go home and have some dinner.
Chairman, I'm not sure if I need to, but I will anyway. With regard to item 7A3, the revised planning enforcement policy, you'll be aware that the resources services overview and the scrutiny group have this on their group as a working issue. I've been asked to chair that working party or task and finish group, but I will still take part in the debate, just for information, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I've not received any questions under procedure 37. So we turn straight to plan 22/01052, which is land adjacent to the Willows, Little Clacton Road, Great Holland. And I believe the planning manager, Mr. G, is going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I am sharing. Is that on screen? Okay. Do we need to make full screen? In my shiny hair is on screen, but that's a different matter. They're disturbing looking back on yourself, isn't it? Well, in many respects, while the screen is loading up, the first bit of the application before members. The Constitution and Part 3 delegated powers sets out that all planning and conservation matters are delegated to the Assistant Director, with the exception of certain planning applications. They are to be determined by committee, and there are other criteria as well. In other words, everything is delegated except for certain planning applications. So on this basis, and I will lead into why I'm talking about this in a moment, prior approval notifications are not planning applications. Certificate of lawful use are not planning applications. Listed building consent they're applications, but not planning applications. And so ultimately, these are delegated often. Class Q, therefore, is the conversion of agricultural buildings to dwellings. This is detailed within the general permitted development order as permitted development, but there are criteria and conditions that apply. One such condition on certain classes of PD is the need to seek prior approval to the local planning authority for its prior approval, or to determine if its prior approval required. Failure to consider approval actually requires prior approval normally in committee matters in their own right, but of course they could be called in, or maybe a member of staff or member application. So once class Q is given prior approval, that is based on specific criteria and a range of considerations defined in the order. It is established by case law what is often called a fallback to the principle of residential use, and this is often used when seeking an alternative proposal, and this is in the case of the two cases before committee. Obviously, we've just deferred one of them. The fallback, given the prior approval, may be able to be converted to be a the extent of that weight is obviously a judgment for the decision maker, which in this case would be yourselves. The possibility of class Q permitted development is a low bar. Courts provide the basic principle that the prospect has to be a real prospect, and it doesn't have to be probable or likely, just possibility will suffice. So the alternative proposals to be presented, or one now be presented, are in the countryside and are contrary to the development plan. In terms of the approval, materially contrary to national or local policy to come to committee. So on one hand, the prior approval doesn't come to committee, but this alternative proposal in respect of a full application is contrary to the local plan, does come to the committee. So I'm pretty, are we repaired? Oh, good. So I'll move on to the presentation. So this is for land adjacent to the Willows, Little Clapton Road, Great Holland. And we have the site location plan. And you visited the site today. And to put that into context, the overall image, and it is a agricultural building site within a field in the countryside. That's a picture of the access or thereabouts. And that is the site from a distance, as you saw today. Again, the access. And what's been helpful is what application consisted of compared to the application before us now. So in terms of siting, obviously it was the existing building before, because the prior approval would be only relevant to the building that exists. And of course, the new proposal overlaps that building in part, but is a new building in its own right. Effectively, the access proposed will be similar. We have differences in materials. We have a difference in height. So we go from 3.1 meters to 5.9 meters. And we have a slight difference in eaves height. So only a little bit, a marginal increase from 2.3 to 2.5. And a slight increase in the footprint from 131 to 143. And this will be more clearer when I go through the plans. So that is the plan provided to show the existing building. And that was the approval given in, and now we have a proposal now. So you see the barn be demolished. You can see my mouse, which is the long building there, and it's a slight movement. There was a small overlap across to position a new building, essentially the same place within the field. And if I go the other way around, that's the proposed elevations of the new dwelling, and that was the floor layout. As a full application, all material considerations must be considered and weighed as if it was any other development proposal and policy. The recommendation is approval, despite the countryside location that would otherwise be contrary to the local plan for a new dwelling in this particular location. The established material principle of development is considered by officers to be significant, and this is a court judgment. However, there is a judgment on the degree of weight this consideration is given, and that judgment is up to each authority. In general principles in these, and case law has followed this to a good degree, while always depending on design and location, it's generally accepted that a new building instead of Class Q should be not significantly greater in floor area, as Class Q doesn't allow for extensions of the original barn. It's because it's followed that we shouldn't be looking at a new building that is significantly greater in floor space afterwards. And ultimately, the building essentially should not be more, should maintain rural appearance more than the building that it replaces. While the floor area in this case is slightly larger, it is considered that the proposal complies as a whole with these points, and it would be difficult to argue that this proposal would have such urbanising impact and would be harmful when compared to the Class Q potential on site. As a new dwelling and full application, this has secured Ram's contribution, and conditions are set out within your paper. But the case officer not sought to remove permitted development from this full application, and I would ask members if I may add that condition to ensure that the new house cannot be extended or altered. And on that basis, the recommendation as your papers, one of approval.
Right. In that case, thank you. We have some public speakers. Mr. Legree.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Chairman, apologies that no one was available to meet you at this and the other site that you went to today. Unfortunately, we've had to make a formal complaint because I've been away on holiday and came back today, and the committee clerk did not bother to follow out of office contact details for my colleague to be able to arrange those meetings. So I have to say we're very disappointed with that. But notwithstanding that, I understand you met Mr. Stevens on site this morning. Unfortunately, Mr. Stevens himself does have some health problems, and including the means of access, despite the comments that you might have heard today. 2 points I'd like to make that hasn't necessarily been covered in the report. Not a great deal to add to the report. I think it's very thorough and very well presented. But 2 points. One is the case of Tonbridge, the Tonbridge Manning case, that was the subject of a Court of Appeal case that has recently been updated with the case of Formby Parish Council versus Sefton Borough Council. That came out earlier this year, and that was an issue where a committee approved a scheme despite the Parish Council's objections to it, and the High Court accepted that the development could include substantial extensions to the building. So although Mr. Pecuniary has mentioned that it should be similar, the Formby versus Sefton Borough Council case actually takes that one step further and allows for the building to additions, and it's still taken into account within the fallback position. The second aspect is the fallback position exists. There's no question of that. You can't revoke that permission. It's available for the applicant to convert that dwelling. That will go ahead regardless of your decision this evening if you decide to refuse it. So the principle of a dwelling of virtually the same size is a matter that you must take into account in accordance with the Court of Appeal. The third aspect is I understand that members were slightly concerned about the height of the new build. There's a reason for that, and that was spelt out to the planning officer within the application, but I note that it hasn't been covered. The reason why there's an height is that we have chosen to provide a more rural vernacular roof pitch. Current roof pitch, 15, 18 degrees. Standard roof pitch for a cottage within the countryside is about 42, 43 degrees pitch. In this instance, to ensure that the dwelling actually looks like something rather than a very low flat roof building, we've increased the pitch to 35 degrees. That is the sole reason why the ridge height is greater than what is on the application drawing. It can have you that's going to look squat and very out of character as a dwelling in the countryside. So I feel that the pitch there is not excessive, it's not inappropriate, it's certainly first floor, so there's no suggestion of that. And Mr. Pateman questions about removing PD rights, fully understand that, and the reason for that. It's a very plain, simple building to replace a rather plain, simple building of almost identical size. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Marshall, Mr. Bill Marshall, speaking in favour of this application.
Good evening. Let me speak. I speak tonight in support of this application, an acceptance of the fact that it should be approved, except that it doesn't conform to the development plan, countryside policies, but there are departures, as we know, of the development plan, and we should take that into consideration. And Mr. Legree has spoken, explaining the reason of the height difference. So I agree that with the officer that the plan is like. Very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I have no other speakers. That being the case, colleagues, it'll be questions. I suspect there will be quite a few, so I'll start the ball rolling. I wonder if the officer could put up the drawings as was, because it didn't seem to bear any resemblance to the tumble down shed that we saw this morning. That one looks, colleagues will see, but that one looks to be about twice the size of what we saw this morning. We saw a building half roofed with props holding it up, and nothing like as neat and tidy as that. So I'll leave that one to colleagues. Right, questions for anybody else? Yes, Councillor Guglielmi, I'll take next.
I know this is reviewing planning, but when you gave them planning permission for the first lot, what about the two trees? Where the access is going to be, the two very old trees that hang over that are excellent. There's no, if they actually come right down, almost you hit your head on. So how can they have access to that plot of land? Put that to the officers.
Obviously, in terms of the trees, I don't know their status. I assume they're not protected in terms of tree preservation orders, and they're not in the conservation areas. So, unfortunately, they are or could be removed without needing any consent. In terms of the access arrangements on a prior approval, it isn't necessarily part of that approval to consider the access arrangements in the context of the change of use, which is the prior approval element that you're considering with regard to the that former application. But you do have access as part of this application, and that is before you.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, that was going to be my first question as well. I mean, it was very obvious that there were two very mature trees, and the fact hearing the officer saying that they could be removed would absolutely horrify me. One of them is an extremely mature willow, which was hanging down, and you couldn't really, you'd probably get a car underneath it, but you wouldn't be able to get anything else. It doesn't seem to be a suitable access point for me at all. So, yeah, question is, I mean, I've had a scour through it. Has anybody done as part of this application, has been a tree survey done?
I don't have a tree survey with this application to consider.
So did you say no, there's no tree survey?
No.
Do you think there are two mature trees right in the very vicinity where the proposed vehicle access is going to take place?
You bear with me a moment, I want to check something.
Shall I move on to another question, Chair? Okay. My observation as well is similar to your own, Chairman, that you said that in terms of the size of the original building, the footprint or the size of the building that we saw, what was left of it, that was held up by 3 straps that you normally see on the back of an articulated lorry, but it was sort of seemed to be holding it up. You had a fairly small frame of an old building there. But the pictures we saw of the application, the previous application, seems to be quite a lengthy building. I was wondering, if we can confirm the actual distance or the length of that site that we saw, or that building that we saw, the framework that we saw, is that the length of the building that we saw in that picture, the application, or are we looking at the footprint which is beyond the building that we saw just about standing today?
Sorry, forgive me, I just need to look up something about your first. Sorry. Sorry, Councillor, in terms of the trees being referred to, can I just ask, are you referring to that tree beyond the garages? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different angle from it. You got that tree there. So if you get, that's a good picture of the tree, but it's not the accent. See, it's a shame we didn't have the applicant there today. He might have been able to point it out to us, but hey ho. I didn't entirely catch what you said there. Now, I don't see there, but if you go back, we're just on.
The tree that we are referring to is essentially sitting in the back here. So the picture was of the double garage here, as you're looking up the driveway. And essentially, the way around it to get to this site, being proposed change of use as part of the curtilage of that new house, would go across the field and then around the garages, and then using the existing access to access the road.
Well, that's not what we saw today. When we was on site, the natural sort of pathway of the garage there, or the roadway, was the other side of the tree. There was two trees there, and that was the way that we went. And in fact, the owner was present and didn't say anything else. Well, in fact, the owner said that that's not going to be the drawing, and he suggested that it was going to be put it into the road anyway.
Well, thank you. We can only accept what the application says, but ultimately, this is all of the information I have with the application, and as a matter of debate, if you feel that's insufficient, that may be a part of your debate.
I mean, I'll put it open to the rest of the committee in case I'm seeing something wrong there. But where did you see that road? Where did you see the access road coming between the trees, or the other side of it, which is presumably where the garages are? So are the garages going to be demolished, or? So I don't know. Perhaps ask the rest of the committee.
This aerial photograph isn't overly helpful, but essentially that double garage is that piece just in there. So you would go round the garage, round to the back, and then out to the field. The trees are just, you can't tell on an aerial photograph, but the trees are within that vicinity. So it is very likely the driveway would pass either underneath or possibly need the removal of the tree to be achievable.
So that would deeply concern me. That's all I would say, is that would seem wholly inappropriate for me. That is a very mature tree, and whether it has a TPO on it or not, I don't know. But that is that's a tree worth saving, and I wouldn't be very happy with that. If I pass over to other members of the committee, I may come back after. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 6.7, can I just explore this fallback? Just need some clarity, please, on the 3 tests with regard to attributing weight. I understand the first part. There's a lawful ability to undertake such a use, because obviously that's been granted. But can you put in layman's terms, please, what the second part means? Whether there is a likelihood or real prospect of such occurring. Does such apply to the lawful ability, or does such apply? Does that word apply to the fact that the conversion is going to go ahead? Thank you.
So the in that context, the fallback position in the Morning Borough Council, effectively they're saying that the basic in determining the materialness of the fallback position, the basic principle is that the prospect, a real prospect, or likely a possibility, will suffice. So if there's a possibility that this undertaken under the General Permitted Development Order, then that is sufficient for giving it weight. Does that help? Or do I need to?
Chairman, can I just come back then? So if I understand that correctly, so if there's a likelihood of conversion of what is there now to what was proposed under the agreed prior permission, then the fallback position is there. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. This test was in respect of looking at if it was class Q already given, which is essentially the same conversation here. So it is a case of you give it material weight based on the possibility that can occur in terms of a permitted development. So if you are convinced in your minds there is a possibility that can be converted, then that is a material weight to apply. What weight you give it is still your decision.
I suspect the councillors as lost as I am. I must talking about is what we do to a permission that's already been granted. A material thing that we must consider. That's the way I read it. And but it still doesn't overcome the fact that it's outside the development, but must give it some weight. Is that the right understanding that I've got? Right, some weight depending on these 3 questions. Right, okay. Have I got anyone? Yes, I have got Councillor Harris.
Thank you. I did ask another question, which you were still looking up the bit about the trees, I think, which was my uncertainty over the what's left of a building that we saw today versus the picture of the previous application. Don't know if we can go back to not well that the building that so no yeah that one. So that length of that building in there, east standard is equal to the length of the remains of the building that we saw today, the frame of it. I think if we flip back to the derelict building that we saw. Are you going to show me something there? Sorry, go on.
There seems to be a very long delay between what I choose to show and what comes up on screen. There you go, got there. A photo, unfortunately, is hard to scale against. Ultimately, in my judgment, I was not there at the site visit, so I can't entirely confirm that something's been demolished or that it wasn't there originally. But by eye, that looks like it has similar number of bays to what that original proposal shows. Although I would say that appears to have no windows, whereas there were windows on the plans. And I don't know what the status of the walls were when you saw the site.
Well, the status of the walls that we saw today was there wasn't any. There was a couple of, well, legs and that were strapped down, and we didn't really see anything. I don't recall seeing anything, and there was a few asbestos type sheets that were broken on one side and then stuffed in between, and alongside there was a bit of corrugated, which looked newer material on the roof, but clearly that hadn't been used for some probably decades, I would have thought, but I'm no expert. But it was it was certainly derelict, but that used from that appearance of that building, it just looks a lot longer. I mean, the building we saw, what was left of it, they look quite small. In terms of the weight and what my colleagues have about the class Q that has already sort of gone through the previous sort of application that was well, not planning application, but one that was authorised by officers. We have to give that a certain amount of weight, but can we just clarify that we also give weight to our new class Q not being in place? Let's say there wasn't anything there, that this is outside of the development boundary, that it's probably highly likely that this wouldn't get a look in anyway. So the only reason why we're sitting here now is because of this derelict building that's got a class Q on it. Is that sort of a layman's term summary?
It's actually a more complicated question than perhaps you consider, but ultimately there are a number of things you have to give weight to. You have to give weight to the NPPF, which supports reuse of buildings for other uses. Redundant buildings in the countryside are, supported by the NPPF to become dwellings. Obviously, the prior approval is a mechanism in order to seek to get dwellings within existing agricultural buildings, and of course there are various other prior approvals in order them to get to residential status. Get what you give the NPPF, but you also do this need to give weight to your own local plan and development plan policies. You have that is up to date. It is only approved this year, and you have a 5-year housing supply. These are all factors in terms of the balance that you need to debate and consider. Now, if you decide that they outweigh the consideration of the material consideration that they could possibly go ahead with the conversion of the building as it stands, in accordance with the prior approval that they've got under permitted development, that is your consideration.
Thank you. And the prior approval that they've got gives basically the go ahead for that building in that design with that roof height, with a roof at 3.1 meters, not at 5.9 meters, which is what this application is. So it's doubling in height pretty much. And so it's 3.1. So it's as it is in that building now. So we obviously need to consider that versus what this difference is in this application?
So prior approval actually is quite flexible in the context of it does allow quite significant works to take place. It doesn't allow for increase in height of the building or extension of the building, but it does allow for rebuilding in part some walls necessary for the purposes of conversion.
So it looking at the height, I mean, the height is a significant factor. It's gone 3.1 metres to 5.9. So in this application, there is a significant increase in the height of the building as opposed to what was put through in the Class Q.
There is a difference in the height, and obviously, you know, we do go from 3.1 metres to 5.9 metres. Your judgment of its impact and harm and significance is for your debate if you wish to take that further. Your officer's recommendation is they find it acceptable in the rural landscape in this location.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a matter of procedure going on, when we arrived, and I'd like to go back to the trees, when we approached the entrance, and I was anxious to listen to the presentation as well, I didn't get much chance to look at the trees. However, I did notice that the willow was a magnificent specimen, and there's everything that you would expect from a tree, being either a Babyloniac or an ostler, a salix, magnificent creature. And the other one being possibly, I don't recognise now, as a part of our native group. If we were minded to
certain if it's within a controllable site, for us to reasonably place a condition on that tree, and therefore it becomes difficult if you're seeking to protect it when it may be dealt with by a third party. So I don't think I could reasonably do that.
What you're saying then is that they stand unprotected and therefore could in effect be cut down to make room for the collection vehicles, etc., who would want to gain access to that that land to develop it.
Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that because I don't know precisely where the trees are. I'm not entirely sure of whether or not it is under threat or not, in the context of its root system, the way the driveway might pass by it, whether it's, you know, obviously the trespass. I don't know. I'm just going to see if there's any other further information I can provide members to help on that issue. But at this moment in time, I do apologise. I don't have that information to hand to give you confidence either way.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually a question for our legal advisors rather than our planning officers. Going back to this fallback position, and we're not lawyers, but the line is there being a position. In interpretation of the three tests, besides there is a
that situation.
Thank you, Chair. So what the officer has explained in terms of the fallback position is correct. So effectively what the Court of Appeal decided was that if there is a position where there is a permission or a right to develop, in this case Class Q under permitted development rights, it can be a material planning consideration for the decision maker to take that into consideration when determining whether or not to grant a full permission on an application. And the judge in that case, he said that the basic principle is that the prospect, it has to be, the basic principle is that for the prospect to be a real prospect, if you decide based on the facts of this particular case, whether or not you feel there is a fallback position, i.e. is there a permission or an ability for the landowner to develop this site, and that has been presented by officers and explained that there is a Class Q, and you can see what they're entitled to develop on the site. So there is a fallback position. The decision for you is, and it only has to be a possibility for the landowner to develop that. So you have facts the way you will give to that fallback position in light of what you're being presented with in terms of what's being applied for now. As you know, as decision makers, you are required to have regard to material planning considerations, but you are required by law to make a decision in accordance with the development plan, unless your considerations indicate otherwise. So the decision for you is firstly to consider the policies in the development plan, and then to decide to look at all other material planning considerations. And as the officer said, that can be the fallback position, that will be the MPPS policy, or any other material planning considerations that relate to this application. And you have to give those due weight in your determination. I'm sorry if that doesn't further with any further. I'm happy to.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to come back to this tree again and the route that's there. And my fellow committee members might want to put me right if I've got this wrong. But I'm pretty certain that the owner, Mr. Thebes, which was, if you look at that picture there, if you look north of that tree, that's where the access was there. That's where it was. If you look at this image that's in that was given to us earlier today, that little garage is on I think it was a container or something. There was actually the back of a lorry that was sat there to the left of the screen there. That is on this drawing, and you can see that the proposed road actually goes exactly where that tree is, exactly where that willow tree is. So clearly a road isn't going to go through that tree as it is unless it's proposed that it's cut down, according to the drawings that we have here.
I've just pulled this from Google. Unfortunately, I'd have to declare it from Google, and it be inaccurate by that version of that. As far as I can see on this plan, the red line essentially stretches across the back here and then down in order to go round that garage and then back to use the drive that continues the road. So essentially a car or what have you accessing the proposed dwelling, I think that looks like a vehicle there, I'm not sure what that is, would essentially drive around here and down. How that may affect the tree in terms of actual tree trunk or root system, I don't have the information other than what you saw on site and what's before me.
Thanks for putting that picture up there. From this drawing that we've all got here, that long roadway there, you know, goes directly where that tree is. Directly where that tree is. So, you know, without any clear indication, we haven't got a tree survey, we haven't got any indication about what's happening to that tree. From the evidence that I saw with my own eyes today, that tree would have to go, and it would deeply offend me.
Recognising the issue in respect of lack of information available to members to consider the impact on the tree, it might be, if I may suggest, Chairman, a reason to defer for us to find out further information and get a clear, accurate access plan in respect of the impact on the tree and that particular routing being proposed, and for us officers to take that away and get that information for you. Decision is based on that issue. We cannot be certain that we are right or wrong about that issue, and there is, in my view, a risk. But that's obviously if that issue is one that wishes to be pursued. I question it might be, and so it might be pressed.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, hopping back to this fallback position, it says the approval for conversion of build. Now, the building. I don't see, quite honestly, and I don't think anybody else does, that there's any chance of converting that building into a dwelling. I don't think it's feasible or possible. So logically, if we refuse this application, what we're saying is that they could actually go back and convert what is there into a bungalow, for instance. That's what we're saying.
Obviously, we've given the possibility of conversion material weight, and we've, as often proposed, members may decide not to give it significant weight, that there is a possibility of that conversion despite the prior approval been given. You may consider that the current condition of the building has deteriorated to such an extent that the permittment rights prior approval could not be implemented in accordance with that within the general permitted development order. However, that is a judgment of weight.
Thank you. That's cleared a bit up.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start, I just would like to agree with my colleague, Councillor Codling. I think they would need a miracle worker to try and resurrect that building, not a builder. But anyway, in terms of coming back to the planning manager's point about deferment, I would say if we were going to refuse this on that single point of the tree, then perhaps I would say agree with that. But if we have other issues, then I'm too sure deferring it over that.
Thank you, Chairman. Moving on. With regard to drainage, it states that it's not going to be connected to a main sewer. It's going to have a Kingspan with Clargester biodisc commercial sewage treatment plant. I had a look at that report that was submitted with the application earlier today. Riveting read. But in part of that, it said that the and hopefully clean waste would go to a water course. And according to the Environment Agency, we need to be satisfied that foul drainage can be provided without an adverse impact on the environment. Has the usage or the potential usage of that system been evaluated, or have we just accepted that report? Because what I wouldn't want to see, I'd want a bit more information about not necessarily how it all works, but the fact that we're not going to have discharge of waste potentially into a watercourse. We have enough of that from the water companies, let alone individual houses. So, yeah, has it been evaluated? And if it is into a watercourse, where is the watercourse? Thank you.
I don't have information on which watercourse it would be. In terms of the evaluation, the only evaluation available is per the report and the officer's evaluation under the drainage section of the report. I don't have it immediately available, which page that is. That is as far as the evaluation available as we can present.
I'm at this screen that we were given this morning, and from the looks of this, I'm going to have to go back to these trees. I do humbly apologise. There's been no mention within this, and I believe that a survey should be either carried out on these because of the excellency of the trees themselves. What a tree. The other ones are unsadly, but so I don't know what your views are on that.
Given your local plan in respect of measures to enhance the environment and to protect the environment, you have reasonable grounds to consider that they may be detrimentally impacted by the proposal, and therefore that may form a reason in your debate in respect of a possible refusal, if you feel. I don't think I can add more to that.
The existing permit, and I think we uncovered all sorts of things. The trees definitely would not allow, in my opinion, the way it stands, an access way. That was not helped by the owner saying this morning he had no intention of using this access way anyhow. He was going straight out from the property to the main road. Now, that's another story, but he was told under no circumstances we were not considering that tonight, and if that's what he wanted, it would be another planning application. To differ from this one. But with the we're again a bit fluctuating. I don't, in my view, the balance is such that there isn't too much weight on it. And I think we should now revert back to the local plan, which says this is definitely outside the development area. It is a balance, it's a tricky balance, as we know that whether if we were to refuse it tonight, something could still go there because of the previous permission. But with all the waiting, I, at the present moment, am thinking that we should revert back. And it is a personal view and opinion. But if we don't stick to this local plan, which is so new, anybody could come along and say, I've got a shed in the back garden, but I would like a 4-bedroom house over there. We've got a plan. Let's use it. Let us stick to the plan. And that plan specifies the area that new buildings should be in. And therefore, I wouldn't want to defer it. We've got the application in front of us. We know what the problems are. And I think we should make a decision.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to propose that we refuse this. I think that you're quite right in terms of the weight that should be applied to the Class Q. I don't think that it's significant at all. I think that there's a massive amount of debate there as to whether or not that could actually be achieved as well. I don't think that that's actually there's got to be a refurbishment of that old property, etc. I think it's got to be demolished and then there'll be a new building. But I think that, you know, it's the vehicle access is unacceptable. I think that the trees, there's going to be clearly an impact on the trees, and this council has a policy in terms of climate emergency. This is a mature tree. The last thing we want to do is to cut down a tree, which will take decades to actually get one of these carbon eating machines back in its full glory. And I think it's outrageous to consider chopping that down. And as the owner previously said as well, he said that, well, he pointed out where the roadway was, and he confirmed that that's where it was. And he said that we won't be using it. We're going to put in another application for, or we're going to use a different entrance. I think that, which I think is unacceptable, what's left of it for a number of years at 3.1, I think it does have a harmful effect. And yeah, I just don't think that. I think the main issue is it's outside the local plan. Thank you.
May I provide some advice on the proposal, please? I do consider that a proposed refusal based on the harm to the building could be on the basis that we do not have the information to have certainty of the impact. And my advice would be, rather than do that, would be to defer so we can receive that information, so that if that is an issue, we can then come back to you confidently to advise on that. Ultimately, if we went to appeal and a tree survey turned up at appeal and proved that we had no issue at all, we would be possibly at risk of costs in terms of reasonable behaviour. In terms of the condition of the building, ultimately, I'll leave you with that point. And in terms of height, again, you were looking at the height being a harmful impact. I would perhaps find it easier to understand what it harms in terms of landscape, detrimental visually, rural character. That might be something just to express a little bit further. The only other thought I had was that ultimately, in terms of the tree, we have to look at solutions when we're looking at appeal, and it might be possible, but I don't know the extent of ownership, that the access could be in front of the garage rather than behind. That might be an option that the applicant wishes to explore. So deferring on that basis might alleviate at least that one issue. But of course, the other two issues you may wish to take further.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I hear what you say about the tree, and yeah, you know, the fact we should learn from so that when they must have seen the tree, but the map we were given today overlaps where the trees. I mean, you haven't got to be a tree expert to realise there's a tree there. It's going to have a massive impact. So, I mean, we're always told that we can only look at the evidence that's put before us, and that's what we're doing. The fact that you are suggesting that you move it out of the village, that changes the design, it changes the drawing. So, you know, that's. I'm only looking at what the evidence that we have in front of us.
You're quite correct, and so I will retract the point about alternative. But in terms of the tree survey, may I suggest then, if you wish to pursue that, the point you're making is the information before us fails to demonstrate that there would be no harm.
Your pardon, I was away from the mic anyhow. It is against the officer's recommendation, and therefore we should want to know the exact reasons, because undoubtedly, like all these others, they do go to appeal, so we've got to be spot on. What are your reasons in terms, it's principally, it's outside the development area. To John's point, that we haven't got an officer on the tree, but we still never went on site. That's the whole point of that. Turn to the officers and see whether they can help us on that.
If I might, so there are parts to this. One is that it's contrary to the development plan, and you're saying that I can give you the normal drill in terms of development in the countryside, contrary to the local plan. You've got policy SP3, SP7, seeking not to allow development or new development in the countryside for the reasons of that is not outweighed by the prior approval, and given the fact that that is in such poor condition that you are not the possibility of compliance with the general permitted development order is not looking as likely. Sorry, that's a bit of a jumble, but essentially that you're essentially saying is in the countryside, it's contrary to the local plan, and you're not giving due weight to the prior approval for the reasons of the poor condition of the building. Right, that's sort of one part. The second part is the height of the building, the proposed building, and the impact or potential impact on trees that has failed to be demonstrated otherwise, is contrary to policies such as PPL3, SPL3, which refer to the rural landscape and protection of the landscape and character. And on that basis, you're saying this is harmful to the trees and landscape character. No. Brings it into sort of two parts then.
Yeah, I think that's what I said. Yeah.
Be voting on officers are just checking the solicitors. Do either of you, before I take the vote, wish to say anything?
It was just a pure legal check in terms of the flexibility of officers to ensure that we take that reason forward. It is a technical question. Apologies for disturbance.
Yeah, if I can just come back in just one
Right,
second.
a show of hands if that.
Can we just come back in one second? Just clarify, we did point as well that it's outside the development boundary. We got that, okay.
Okay. Right, so I will do the I'll go around alphabetically again. Councillor Alec, 4. Councillor Baker,
4.
Councillor Codling,
4.
Councillor Guglielmi,
4.
Councillor Harris,
For refusal.
Councillor Wiggins,
4.
and mine will be 4. It is a unanimous vote then for refusal. Thank you very much. That will right. Off again. Any members of the public are welcome to stay if they should wish to hear the debate on this. Right. Now, I think Mr. Graham Knox is going to put this one to us, I think.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, as you say, this is the proposed revised planning enforcement policy document, which forms part of the council's approach to dealing with planning enforcement. Just to give a bit of background, it is a revision to an original document which was produced over 10 years ago, so it's well in need of a revision report, or the new document has done. As you noted in your report, the National Planning Policy Framework recommends that local authorities do have such a document. It helps to provide the public with clarity as to how planning enforcement should take place and how we assess planning enforcement. We have discussed this through the corporate enforcement group. They've assessed a draft version of this document, and now it's come before members for approval. As this is the committee that approve the specific document, which falls under your remit as the planning committee. As I say, I'll do a brief overview of the content, and then we'd certainly welcome members' views on the content. I understand that in the report, planning enforcement is a key function of the development management process and assists the council in delivering a proactive planning service in line with. It's a high-profile part of the service, and it's essential that we have an open and transparent document that tells the public, developers, members of the public, and so on, exactly how we undertake enforcement work. So the policy sets down how alleged breaches of plan control should be reported to the council, and how these will be dealt with in a priority or to work with. They seek compliance with planning policy or the impacts of development in question. In the majority of cases, compliance is achieved through negation of formal enforcement action, either serving of enforcement notice or injunction as a last resort. So the majority of cases are dealt with in that manner. As we know, in many cases, individuals or businesses perhaps misunderstand planning, don't understand why planning is required, and hence we get involved from a planning enforcement perspective. More often than not, people will then seek to work with us and seek compliance with policy. As we say in the report, dealing with planning enforcement work is discretionary. We're not bound to take enforcement action, simply because a building or a change of use, as an example, has taken place without planning permission. If we consider that actually and would permission through a planning application, then it's not in the public interest to take action in those circumstances. Again, as members are aware, the policy there's a list of various options that are open to us in terms of enforcement action we can take. These include planning control notices, stop notices, breach of condition notices, and in rare cases, the serving of injunctions. The policy sets down in detail that are open to us of good enforcement, including establishing and following a set of standards, being open and transparent, being helpful, consistent in decision making, and making proportional decisions and being accountable. In terms of the proposed or the service standards that are being used, the Council have established a priority system for dealing with enforcement matters, which reflects the level of seriousness of the complaint or breach reported. Priorities, therefore, are listed 1 to 4, where the lowest. With priority 1 cases, this would involve officers being involved within or being put forward to us, and preferably within 1 day, particularly when potential harm is irreversible, such as demolition of a listed building or protected trees. Priority 2 cases need to be assessed within 5 days, priority 3 within 15 days, and so on. Obviously, and certainly within 3 working days, we'd aim to get a response to them in terms of confirming receipt of the response and how we're dealing with their particular case. In addition, planning officers obviously work with, or enforcement officers work with other teams across the council, and this is where they work closely in the corporate enforcement group in looking at specific occasions where there may be multi breaches of legislation, not just planning. It's clearly important that we work with other teams to ensure such things are done on a corporate basis, not just from a planning perspective. Certainly in terms of planning, one that's used regularly would be Section 215 notices, which are used in support of with other legislation as well. You'll note that we've attached to Appendix B the harm assessment form. We've had one in place for some years, and this is an update of that. Again, it's been taken through the corporate enforcement group. Obviously, there's how much harm is suffering. I think with a scoring criteria, that it's not an exact science, if you like, and certainly there will be cases where I mean, we looked at anything that falls below 6 as an example on the scoring chart. We would probably not normally take action, but it doesn't stop officers looking at that and saying, well, actually, even though it's below 6, we still think that, you know, we should pursue it and at least get a retrospective planning application in place. As I say, in terms of the criteria used, it's one that is used across Essex and used by other authorities. And I think, as I say, it's difficult to get an exact way of doing that, but it's certainly a good aid to officers in making their initial assessments. So in conclusion, the planning enforcement policy established the framework for how the council will deliver its planning enforcement function and will contribute to providing a proactive planning service. It establishes how cases will be prioritised and sets down standards of service that the public can expect when making an enforcement complaint. So it's recommended that the committee adopt the revised planning enforcement policy document. As I've said, I very much welcome members' views on the document and whether they require additions to it or changes. It's very much a case we want members to own this document. It's your policy at the end of the day, and it's important we get it right. So I very welcome members' comments, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Maybe it's we are really looking for tonight to endorse this document, but Mr. Norse has said that, as far as I'm concerned, there are in points that I want to bring up, or ask some questions. Shall we do them questions? I will invite the board. Right, so let's take him first.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak to the members of your committee. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think our Officer Norse put it rather well when he done that. What we're looking at here is an update and a revision of a policy that is many, many years old. It needed bringing into line with the National Policy Planning Framework. That is what we've done. The policy planning framework changes and moves, and it will continue, no doubt, to consistently. This is how just one step in among the things that we are working on in enforcement. I think I've heard the word enforcement more than any other portfolio for planning. I hear it a lot. It's something that we're working on generally. Things coming in that will come together and change the way that enforcement works very much for the better. That's what we're looking to achieve. I hope you're right, and we can then get on and do the next bit. Thank you, members. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Alexander's got 1 or 2 points, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I take on board exactly what the portfolio holder for planning said. What we're looking at here, I mean, please do correct me if I'm wrong. What we're looking at here is a policy that's already in place, but is now, as has been said, been brought up to date, incorporating all attached to this, and maybe adding 1 or 2 points that we would think that improve working constructively, not interested in operational side of it, of course, but only to look to the policy that's before us in these papers. Okay, so with I believe I think what would be very useful, and I'm not going to usurp everything because my colleague Councillor Giuliani wants to add something to this, I'm sure. My proposal would be that we bring into line some kind of regular update for the councillors to be able to see. In the olden days, when I was younger, had a hair, we used to have a regular screen that came out telling us where enforcement sat and who was doing what. And I think that would be a very useful additive to that, if that was possible to incorporate it. Okay. The other thing I would like to see is like a traffic light system. In audit, we have that system in place in which priorities or at risk or reputation becomes a red. There are obviously going to be some things that need urgent attention, but there are others. 1 inch on a garden fence is going to look way down in the green, because you have to prioritise the staff to the need of the enforcement, which I see that. There are many other things that I'd like to bring in. I'm going to now colleagues to come
Be quicker that way. Thank you. The points raised by Councillor Alexander are already in hand. We have already discussed the form that you used to receive, the report you used to receive quarterly. That will be returning. Officers are currently looking at a form that was previously used. It will come back in that form. We'll see how it works. If that doesn't work, we'll change the format. It is on its way back, and officers are nodding and confirming we have already discussed and sorted that one out. With regard to a red, amber, green system, that has also been discussed at length, and something will be implemented. It's difficult, and we must be clear that there are parts of enforcement that we cannot bring into the public domain. So when we operate a red, amber, green system, it may be that that will not be something public can see for obvious commercial reasons. However, your ideas are already, I'm pleased to say, in process. So perhaps at a crystal ball, but we're already on the way to all that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, just one or two things to the actual itself. On page 50, priority 3, including directional signs to new developments. It's display of unauthorised advertising, and we've had this in our area quite a lot, including directional signs to new developments. And then on page 51, a new thing, 8.9, harm assessment, must be reviewed on a 6-monthly, its performance. Oh, and there was on page 57, 10.5, enforcement officers will make themselves, delete try to, and will make themselves. It's very important that the enforcement officers make themselves known to the developer. Not will try to. At the moment, it's all for now.
Chairman, could Councillor Guglielmi just repeat the second one, because I was trying to scribble and I didn't get it. 8.8, I think you said.
8.9, a new one. Yeah, at the bottom of 8.8. Yeah, added to it. That's right. Harm assessment must be reviewed 6 monthly, and its performance. Okay. Go on about the signs as well, didn't you, Paul? Yeah. Thank you.
By answering, I take it, Mr. Norris, you're happy with that? And
I think Councillor Guglielmi's still got a microphone on.
Oh.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, no problem with either of those. I think we'll have to give some thought as to how we're going to review the harm assessment form on a 6-monthly basis. We'll have to see whether it is important we review that. It's got to be as accurate as we can. You know, we've had quite a bit of debate about this in the corporate enforcement group, and it's not an easy one to get right, but we can, you know, we'll certainly review it. Just in terms of directional signs, sometimes under permitted development, developers are allowed to put directional signs up. So we have to be slightly careful on that one, but they normally are on their sites, not in the middle of nowhere. So if they're in the middle of nowhere and well away from the site, we can take action against that.
Because as you're probably aware that we suffer with a lot of those in our area at the moment. So yeah.
I didn't catch what Councillor Guglielmi said, so I interrupted. I do apologise, but I don't have a as yet.
Thank you, Chairman. Enforcement. Oh my God, where do we start? This is probably, or has been, one of the most frustrating things since I've been elected councillor, with numbers of views. Obviously, numbers of things that are reported either via the councils or via residents, and without mentioning any individual cases, there are considered. My concern has been resource, and I don't know whether this is the time or place to talk about whether planning has the sufficient resource to undertake and to enforce these policies. That's number one. Number two, what's talking about is will that resource work hours outside of normal officer, let's say, working hours, i.e. Saturdays and Sundays, when of these festival impingements or infringements of planning applications, or that need enforcing happen at weekends and not Monday to Friday. That's point two. Well, okay. Well, what's their policy in terms of recruitment then? Okay, I mean, there is a question that I can, there is that. Also, again, without mentioning any individual case, but I'm looking at page 65, which is the harm assessment form, and item number 3, which is public safety. Obviously, it's quite a clear question, but there are dangers to public safety which are indirect, as in somebody who's riding a horse, who gets thrown from a horse because something's happening at a site next door, which is causing the problem, will give reassurance that that will be included in that, or whether that requires a separate question, whether there are any possible effects that relating to animals as well, and obviously there are riders. I think I'll stick to that point first, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll do my best. If I get into trouble, I shall revert to my officers who are much cleverer than I am. The first thing you brought up was resource. My understanding is the resource, it's not about money. It's very, very difficult to recruit the people we want. Very, very difficult. And I did take the trouble to check that fact. So I actually spoke to other councils, portfolio holders in and around Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, and actually they all have the same problem. So it's not unique to us. Recruiting the right people is difficult. We are working on that, and we're looking at various ways of changing what we do from a recruitment point of view. We also, as I'm sure you're aware, are looking at a new member of staff joining us in the not too distant future. Watch this space, that will happen. So we're moving correctly there. But if you're talking resource in terms of money, my understanding is that that is not the issue. The issue is finding the right people. I don't know about you, but I personally wouldn't particularly want to work in enforcement. I can see Councillor Baker probably would, but I'm a bit wimpy on that front. So it's not something I want to do. They're not people that are just readily available on every street corner. They are quite hard to find. You also mentioned danger to public safety. It's really difficult when you have a situation where something is happening that affects somebody next door. Then you move into actually the legal side, where we probably look over to our solicitor and the rules of reasonableness and what is reasonable and what could be reasonably expected. That starts to get perhaps a little bit too far down the road for our remit. So, I mean, I'm quite happy to have conversations with anyone on that, and I'm quite sure our legal people are too. But there is a line there, and there is only so much we can do. Do we say then that, if somebody let off a firework in Frinton and somebody fell off a bike in Kirby because they heard the firework, is that planning issue? If we're cross-planning into something else, if I go wrong at any point, the solicitors will stop me. I've said that just to ensure that they do. But back to your first point, resource, which I think is important. Yeah, the resources are there. We simply need to find the right people. We are trying new strategies. We've talked about various strategies to help us do that in a slightly different way to the way we've done it in the past. But tonight I'd really like to concentrate on policy, because we need to do that first. Once policy is in place, we can start to put the meat on the bones. The policy is the bones. So we need, particularly from my point of view, I have requested an A and B, which hopefully we'll do shortly. The Chief Executive has agreed to that. So we will do an A and B, which hopefully we'll iron out exactly what the process is and where we go for what and how we do what. Because once you understand the process a little better, makes more sense why sometimes things take time. It's not always our fault. We take a view that efficiently and with as little cost in time or money as possible. And whilst we often hear about the cases that are perhaps dragging on, what we tend not to hear about are the many, many cases that are dealt with very, very quickly. And there are many of those where a developer's stroke owner is contacted and it's dealt with, but we don't hear about those. They don't come to us, but there are a substantial number of those not there. So it is working. It's getting better. I think I can look over at my officers and expect a nod of the head when I say that we are moving in the right direction. We're moving swiftly, and as long as I have anything to do with it, we'll move swifter too. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank. The point that I'm suggesting is the question 3, which is on the form danger to public safety. I just need whether that's included in that section. Is there danger to public safety? It's not just black and white. It's danger to somebody who's happened to work on the site, or it needs to be effective. I mean, I'm mentioning horses because I've got horses, and a particular case that I'm thinking about. There are big impacts on horses and safety. So all I'm saying is that there needs to be in this policy a recognition of other groups as that planning can affect.
I think when Officer North explained the policy, the one thing he did say is this scoring system, if you like, it's flexible, and that's absolutely key. So there's flexibility built in, and I think as well as the scoring system, which I would call the guide, what we do require from our enforcement officers is some common sense too. So there will be situations, you're quite right, where you look at it and actually it doesn't score 6 on here, but hey, it needs enforcing. We are looking for enforcement officers to understand that this is a guide. It's not a Bible, therefore you can deviate from it. If something only scores 4, but it obviously needs enforcing, then I think the flexibility is there also to take into account things that, as you call the other groups, I think that anyone with common sense would pick up the problems you're talking about. And so we need to employ people with common sense. There you go.
Thank you, Councillor Babe. One last recommendation from me, and then I will move on.
I was going to ask if Councillor Berry would like a job. Quite honestly, I think you nailed it. Perfectly. That if there's third parties being affected by a development, then I suspect it's also going to tick other boxes as well, not just the public safety issue. So yes, we can give an assurance on that. That would be looked at, seriously.
Thank you to both. These haven't been looked at for at least 10 years. I think that it is, and I would suggest that the officers would already update if there's any aids, etc., in any event. And just to see if we can tweak it and obviously continuously improve it. Thank you.
Thank you. With regards to the other group's point, I think it's important for any enforcement policy on a specific area, specific topic, to reflect that something may have been reported, say, to the planning service, which is not a planning issue, but that the council services work together to find a solution, if possible, to a problem. And that is the benefit of the corporate enforcement group that the council has set up, which is an internal body, and it has officers at assistant director level, but it also has the relevant portfolio holders now attend. So that is one of the things that I've been really that we don't think in silos. We think across the council to support each other for the benefit of the residents. So I just wanted to give Councillor Harris reassurance that we should always, as officers, be working with each other. Planning functions and powers might not be the appropriate ones to use, but there may be others to use instead. So officers should always be working like that. With regards to the review of the policy, I actually think that's very, very sensible. This has been outstanding for some while. We've acknowledged audit committee have been asking for it for a while. So, it's good that we've got something before members. There's the licensing statement, which is going to the licensing committee, I think, next week. And actually, they review that by virtue of the legislation on a 5-year cycle. And unless something happens in relation to major policy or legislation to change that. So I think we should adapt policy as we would do the one. So I think if you wanted to build that into the recommendations, I think it's very sensible to do so. The other thing I was going to just say, overview and scrutiny, sorry, to abbreviate, overview and scrutiny task and finish review group could look at, what are the obstacles which have been encountered. And as Councillor Bray has said, it's a national issue which local government is struggling when you're competing with the private sector. So yeah, definitely think it needs to work. So Councillor Baker scribbled some notes down.
And now, in fact, the questions are him now. So,
thank you, Chairman. I've put more green ink on this than Donald Trump's had crossed out bits in his papers. But it's because I wanted to go through it with a fine tooth comb, because I think it's very important that we get this right. I like the fact that we do have a corporate enforcement group. What they do is quite secret, though, because we never know what's going on, but that's fine. And I like the fact, because I've had a personal experience where the council departments haven't worked together. Our chief exec says all the time, it's the Al Capone issue. If you can't get them on one thing, get them on another. Anyway, to the document, page 46, I think it is 4.4. The paragraph to publish details of the decision. I think that should be changed to we will, because we want to be open and transparent, or we aim to do it with a certain amount of time. That needs a bit of a tweak if possible. 4.4, second paragraph, last line. I aim to publish, or we will publish details of the decision when a case is closed. So some different wording around that. On page 47, 4.7, proportionality, we are also committed to dealing with those who deliberately or persistently fail to comply. I think that goes into the priorities. I think that should be part of priority 1. If we have developers deliberately or persistently failing to comply with conditions, planning regs, building regs, or whatever, they go into priority 1. And are dealt with robustly. I love that word. Dealt with one way. Is it on? Yeah. It's dealt with either in one way or another, not here with people. Maybe that's with regard to 7.3 under priority 4, which says all complaints will be acknowledged within 3 days. Name and contact is the officer who will be investigating. And a reference number will be good, because sometimes that officer may not be available and it may just be an update of information. So maybe we can put that in as well. 8.5, I like the will be pursued to a successful conclusion. Who decides what a successful conclusion is? And under 8.7, the harm assessment form must be completed, not should. And I think it says, yes, 9.12, the website where progress is monitored for each investigation. Is that an internal website or is that the external website? Because we can look at licensing applications, planning applications, appeals, but there's no enforcements on there apart from some very historic ones. So I'm presuming the ones that are sub judice will not be. We either use it or we don't. So maybe that needs to be reworded. I'll shut up now.
I was going to say, from my perspective, quite happy with all those. Yeah. No.
As Mr. North said, I don't think we have any issue with any of those. I think they're fine. They all make perfect sense. The few changes there are excellent. I no issue with those. The reason that we are perhaps more careful than you would like us to be is because, as you know, as an ex-policeman, there are some things that you don't put on public websites, but you already knew that. Thank you.
I'll just come back as well onto the harm form. I was a bit distressed to say staff in the complaint that they only get one. I think they should have 3, because obviously they see lots of, but that's personal. Who take the time. I can't honestly comment on the problems you face, but that's I'm sure your ward councillor is on top of that. I think sometimes that we need to be seen to be doing things, and if there's a reputational risk that tendering gets enough criticism as it is, and it's like, well, they let them build that house and never did anything, should reputational risk be a harm?
I think you're straying into dangerous territory, I think, to go down that route, to be honest. I personally would say no. I take the point about members of staff should be a 2, as everybody else. I don't see why they're a 1. I did look at that myself a bit earlier and thought that can't be right, but yes, I think we'll change that to 2. But yeah, I think it's reputational. I think as a matter, you want to maintain council reputation. That's a given, isn't it? So I think I don't think we need to make it a statement personally.
One more, Chairman, if I may, just on the harm form. Would that not constitute a separate box? Or does it come under, say, undesirable precedent?
I think it's how you monitor such a situation. You know, someone who perhaps has, breaches the regulations a couple of times. Are they any better or worse than someone who does it 4 or 5 times? I think we should be investigating all cases, quite frankly. So whether you've made one mistake or 10, we follow it to the conclusion, whatever. So I personally wouldn't say it shouldn't make any difference to the way we approach it.
Just 10 seconds, Maurice. Sorry, but I mean, the longer answer to that, again, as an ex-policeman, you know that you gate everybody equally, even if you know that you're a previous known criminal. That should be the same here, should it not? So you don't investigate a known criminal any differently to anyone else, and that's the same as it should. I mean,
I think you've forgotten me there. Going back to Andy, to get this, and you were looking for wording for that. I've read this through, and grammatically, it's always difficult to get grammatics right, isn't it? And I fear grammatics. Reminds me of my school days and sadistic teachers. We aim, because the first part of this, with complaints from anonymous source and stop, we aim to publish details. I think the only way you can progress, and I will take leadership on this if I may, there will be published details, because you're making a positive statement. Therefore, you cannot use that syntax in this way. Do you disagree with that? 4.4?
We do need to be careful that some decisions in relation to enforcement matters will contain information which under Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act would be exempt from publication. And one of those categories is about taking action. So I think but you can publish a decision and some summary, I think, of a matter without producing too much detail, but we do need to be very careful there. And as the monitoring officer, who's unfortunately it's my responsibility to make sure we do not publish information into the public. So I can see why it does look a bit woolly there, because we should be publishing a decision if we're closing a matter, but you might not get the details. Yes, but the details will be redacted according to the legislation and the framework we work in. I think that's the difference. You'll get a decision, you might not always get the details in the public domain.
Chair, as it stands, we aim to publish details. In my mind, it's not grammatically correct. We aim. You're using two energies in one sentence, and you can't do that. I can see where you're coming from, and you have to handle this with kid gloves. But I think listening to what you said, there is another alternative to it, but you may not, I don't know. But there is one thing I would like, furthermore, I'd like to bring up, and that is on, let me just snip back here, please. We'll get it in a minute. Okay. Right. We have made various suggestions, Graham, to yourselves. And quite frankly, I'm happy with the policy. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's been brought up to date and it falls nicely with what we need. And we can fall back on it if we need to argue it at an operational time outside of this committee completely. Then I'm quite in favour. I'm going to go for it simply because I think it's the right thing. I always feel sorry for that. It's very difficult for an officer to go out, especially in an enforcement situation. The training for such things must be astronomical to get them to that point where they're confident enough to take on. Not everyone is friendly out there. Some people are quite hostile towards us. I know, because I've had it myself recently. Although we see it as a directional approach, proportionally, when you use that proportionally, it means that you're aiming for no change. And I think what our error has been in the past is that somebody magically builds this wall and they say, you've got to take that down. And said, yeah, we'll take it down. Okay, you'll change, but you haven't. The thing is that it hasn't been fulfilled. And therefore, I think this is where the ensuing danger comes in, because that means that it goes back in time and time. If there's always going to be two people within in this particular area, when you proportionally do something that we do, two people are going to be involved. It's going to be us and somebody else. That somebody else will not be a member of this authority. They will be outside of that, a developer or whoever it might be, and therefore we are wholly reliant upon that word in the beginning before we move to a much stronger way within the conditions. When you don't meet the conditions and it falls, then you can go back and you look on this in as a criminal act, because you have not done what the planning your planning permission has given you. So I have a great sympathy for this. I really do. I think that if you advertise for enforcement officers in the Girl Guide Weekly, you may not get the kind of people you want. It's a matter of certain training, ex-police officers, all those kind of people would fit nicely into this. And so I think that your work ahead of you is very hard, and I wish you all the luck. But I'm going to move formally now that we accept this with suggestions. Have we got to take votes on them? Are you that you're prepared to look at?
Yes, Chairman, I think virtually all the comments that have been raised tonight, we can certainly incorporate within the document. So I think what I'll do is take it away, get those amendments in there, then liaison with the chairman. We would then move to adopt the document if you're satisfied with that. Well, it would be discussed with the chairman, and so yeah, that's it.
Maybe you could work something out that might suit your liaison between the two. Councillor Harris is indicating to speak.
Just very quickly on the point where it won't come back to the committee. I don't know what the timeframes you're aiming to get this through, and any amendments, etc. But we are meeting back here on the 14th of September, and it's an emergency meeting. Perhaps this could be slotted in on that agenda as well. And if it's
Chairman, if I may, obviously it's one of the things that's going to be looked at around planning enforcement is the policy. I'm quite happy to support the document as it will be amended. I think once it's amended, to see it one more time, because obviously there may be something that we missed. But giving our chairman sort of any further suggestions and then letting him turn around and say, yeah, it's adopted. What I'd also like to see is in the recommendation is that a review period. I think it should be less than 5 years. I think it should be 4. When that would be, I don't know, but to leave it 12 years is a bit too long. And the other thing, can I just confirm that if the task and finish group put forward any further suggestions to go in policy, that would then have to come back to this committee to be discussed. But obviously, policy will be in place. It might be that somebody outside this committee is looking at that and going, that's changing. So obviously we're making a decision on behalf of the council, but there could be other members of the council who may feel that something needs to go, in my view. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to alleviate some of those concerns. I don't see any reason, and my officers will correct me, why once we've made the change, it could be practice out to all the members of this committee, who could then pass their comments to the chairman of the committee, who then work with you on that. We've already had a short discussion and we will. So I think I can say quite safely that anything that comes out of there will ultimately land up here. So what I would like to say just in conclusion, then I'm going to go back to the audience where I belong, is just thank you to members of the committee. The point of bringing this to the committee, to the planning committee, was that we wanted your views and we wanted to know which bits you thought were right, wrong, needed altering. And you've given us that information, which officers can now take away and they can tweak it as you've suggested. I've heard no objection from officers to anything you've suggested so far, which I think is brilliant. All you need now is adopt it. Thank you.
For planning has just said. So we could, in effect, be looking at this as a partial agreement if it's taken elsewhere to another place, and they also add things to it. It would be incomplete. And yeah, well, okay, but then I'll accept that. But if within its normality, I would like to see the finished document before. And I think. To you, Chair, because if people are going to add something,
there's confusion here. There's confusion. The finished document will be emailed to you. Overview and screw everything and come back with changes they want in time. I have no idea what the timescale on the task and finish group would be. It could be a year, it could be 3 years, but the finished document that comes to you by email will be the finished document until it's reviewed either by us or by the task and finish group overview and scrutiny, who may make some suggestions for changes. But at this point, we're looking to get this policy through with the changes you've put here tonight. So it is the finished document. Like all finished documents, it's subject to change in the future.
The debate, may I propose some revised recommendations for you to consider for, and if acceptable, they'd be moved and seconded. But having listened to the debate, I just think that the recommendation would be that the Planning Committee adopt the revised version of the Planning Enforcement Policy Document 2022, subject to the amendments being made as discussed in the meeting, to be agreed by the Assistant for Planning in consultation with the Chairman of the Planning Committee following circulation with the committee members. The second one would be that the policy is reviewed within 4 years, unless earlier review is required due to changes in national policy or legislation, or subject to any other internal review. So that would pick up the point of overview and scrutiny, or anything else that comes out in the wash. And number 3 would be, because I think you picked up on this earlier, is that you would require a regular report on the performance of the planning enforcement policy to be brought to the committee as a standing item on a regular basis. Be agreed. How regular that is.
I wish to propose that.
Thank you. My job is done.
We do have an extra planning meeting on Wednesday, the 14th of September. I don't know whether we could get that document. It could be 2 times. Okay. Then, yes. Okay. Right. Well, Morris has proposed, yeah.
We have a second.
Councillor Baker's seconded it. I haven't got it in front of me, so I can't read it out, but you've heard what the monitoring officer has read out to you. And so let's say for or against. Can we just have those in favour of that recommendation, please show. That is unanimous, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now that in published, so I'm going to suggest we have a break anyhow. I guess before we suspend, members know a further item, but I need, before we go on to that, to pass the exclusion notice. So we're asking the committee to consider passing the following resolution under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, that the President, during consideration of agenda item 9, on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph 5 of part 1 of the scheduled 12A as amended by the Act. So we have a right, and let's vote on that then. Those in favour, please show. And those who can vote,